Some books aim to explain life. This one invites you to let go of the need for explanation. The Tao Te Ching is a brief, poetic guide to living in harmony with the natural flow of life. Attributed to Lao Tzu and written over 2,000 years ago, it has quietly shaped Chinese philosophy, influenced countless spiritual traditions, and puzzled readers for centuries. There are no instructions here, just gentle reminders to slow down, to pay attention, to let things unfold without pushing. This video explores 12 verses that capture the heart of its message. For each one, we'll begin with a short reflection, read the full passage, and then sit with the meaning, gently, without forcing it, not to solve the Tao, just to spend time near it. There's a moment in every deep conversation when words start to feel inadequate. You're trying to describe something important, the feeling of falling in love, the weight of grief, the quality of light on a perfect morning, and language keeps falling short. The more precisely you try to capture the experience, the more it seems to slip away. This frustration with words points to something fundamental about reality itself. The things that matter most often resist our attempts to pin them down with definitions and explanations. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source but differ in name. This darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. This opening verse immediately confronts us with a paradox, a text about the unspeakable nature of truth, written in words. Lao Tzu isn't playing word games here. He's pointing to the difference between living reality and our conceptual maps of that reality. The menu isn't the meal. The photograph isn't the sunset. The word love isn't the actual experience of loving someone. When we name something, we create boundaries around it. We say, this is a tree, that is a rock. Here is where I end and you begin. This naming is incredibly useful. It allows us to communicate, to organize our world, to function as human beings. But it also creates the illusion that these boundaries are absolutely real, that the categories we create actually exist in nature. The Tao that Lao Tzu writes about is the underlying reality that exists before we chop it up into separate pieces with our minds. It's the seamless wholeness that includes both the tree and the rock, both you and me, both the words on this page and the silence between them. This reality can't be captured in language because language works by making distinctions, and the Tao is what connects all distinctions. The verse suggests two different ways of engaging with this reality. When we approach life without constantly wanting things to be different than they are, we can sense the mystery directly. We can feel the aliveness that flows through everything, the intelligence that organizes galaxies and grows flowers from seeds. When we're caught up in desire, wanting this, avoiding that, trying to make life conform to our preferences, we see the surface manifestations but miss the deeper current. Neither way of seeing is wrong. We need desire to function in the world, to care for ourselves and others, to create and build and love. But when desire becomes our only mode of perception, we lose touch with the fundamental mystery of existence. We become so focused on getting somewhere that we forget to notice where we already are. The final lines speak to this mystery as darkness within darkness. This isn't the darkness of ignorance or confusion, but the fertile darkness of the womb, of rich soil, of deep space where stars are born. It's the unknown that contains all possibilities, the silence that makes music possible, the emptiness that gives shape to form. To hold our knowledge lightly, to use words and concepts when they're helpful, but to remember that they're tools rather than truth itself. To stay curious about the aspects of existence that can't be measured or explained. To remain open to the mystery that shows up in the gaps between our thoughts, in the pause between one breath and the next. Every January, millions of people make resolutions to learn new things, acquire new habits, become more than they currently are. The assumption is that improvement comes through addition. More knowledge, more skills, more discipline, more stuff. But there's another kind of learning that works in reverse, a wisdom that comes from letting go rather than taking on. Sometimes the most profound changes happen when we stop trying to become someone else and simply remove obstacles to our authentic selves. In pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In pursuit of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things, until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The world is won by those who let it go. But when you try and try, the world is beyond your winning. This verse presents us with two completely different approaches to life and learning. The first path, the pursuit of knowledge, is familiar to most of us. We accumulate facts, develop skills, build expertise. We add degrees to our names, experiences to our resumes, tools to our toolkits. This kind of learning has obvious value and is necessary for navigating the practical world. But Lao Tzu suggests another kind of learning, one that moves in the opposite direction. Instead of adding, we subtract. Instead of grasping, we release. Rather than becoming more complex, we become simpler. This isn't about ignorance or naivete, but about discovering what's essential by shedding what's unnecessary. Think about a master craftsperson, a potter, a musician, a surgeon. Years of training have given them extensive knowledge and skill. But watch them work, and you'll notice something interesting. They're not constantly thinking about technique or trying to remember rules. They've internalized their knowledge so completely that they can simply respond to what the moment requires. Their expertise has become an effortless flow. The path of letting go involves gradually releasing burdens we've collected over the years, old grudges, limiting beliefs, habits that no longer serve us. Each thing we drop makes us lighter, freer, more available to respond authentically to whatever life presents. The verse points toward a state of non-action, not passivity, but action that flows naturally from the situation, rather than being forced by our will. It's like learning to dance well. Initially, you're thinking about every step, forcing your body to follow the rules you've memorized. But eventually, if you keep practicing and letting go, you reach a point where you're not dancing the dance is dancing you. The final lines offer a profound insight about influence and effectiveness. The people who try to win the world through force or manipulation often find that the world slips through their fingers. The more tightly they grasp, the more elusive their goals become. But those who hold their intentions lightly, who remain open to unexpected outcomes, who trust the natural unfolding of events, often find that life supports their deepest purposes in ways they never could have planned. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your dreams. It's about finding the sweet spot between intention and attachment, between caring deeply and holding lightly. When we stop trying to force life to conform to our expectations, we often discover that what we truly need was available all along. We live in a culture that celebrates more money, more recognition, more stuff, more achievement. The assumption is that if something is good, then more of it must be better. We fill our schedules, our homes, our minds with an endless accumulation of experiences and possessions. But there's a point where more becomes too much, where fullness turns into overflow, where striving for completion actually creates its own kind of emptiness. Fill your bowl to the brim, and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife, and it will blunt. Chase after money and security, and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval, and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back, the only path to serenity. This verse presents a series of vivid images that all point to the same principle. There's a natural limit to everything, and wisdom lies in recognizing when you've reached it. The bowl that's filled to the brim can't hold another drop without spilling over. The knife that's sharpened obsessively eventually loses its edge. These aren't moral judgments, but practical observations about how things work in the world. The metaphor of the overfilled bowl is particularly rich. Think about the anxiety that comes with having too much of almost anything. Too much food makes you sick. Too much stimulation overwhelms your nervous system. Too much information paralyzes decision-making. Too much choice creates its own kind of stress. The abundance that was supposed to bring happiness often brings its opposite. The image of the knife being sharpened suggests something important about perfection and refinement. There's a sweet spot where the blade is perfectly honed for its purpose. Keep going past that point, and you start to weaken what you're trying to improve. This applies to skills, relationships, even personal development. The person who endlessly tweaks and adjusts and optimizes often ends up less effective than someone who finds a good approach and sticks with it. The lines about money and approval get to the heart of two of our most common obsessions. The pursuit of financial security can become so consuming that it robs us of the very peace and freedom we thought money would provide. The person who constantly worries about having enough money often lives in a state of perpetual anxiety, regardless of how much they actually have. Similarly, caring too much about what others think turns us into prisoners of other people's opinions. We start performing our lives rather than living them, constantly adjusting our behavior to gain approval or avoid criticism. The irony is that this desperate need for validation often makes us less likable, not more. The verse concludes with perhaps the most important piece of practical wisdom in the entire Tao Te Ching. Do your work, then step back. This isn't about being lazy or irresponsible. It's about recognizing when you've done what you can do and having the wisdom to stop there. Most of us struggle with this stepping back. We keep pushing, keep trying to improve outcomes that are already good enough, keep interfering with processes that would work better if we left them alone. We edit our emails obsessively. We give unsolicited advice to our children. We try to manage situations that are beyond our control. Learning to step back requires tremendous trust. Trust that the world can function without our constant management. Trust that other people can handle their own lives. Trust that we've done enough. It means accepting that our control is limited and that this limitation is actually a gift, not a burden. When we can do our work fully and then release our attachment to the results, we discover a kind of peace that can't be achieved through getting more of anything. This serenity comes from alignment with natural rhythms rather than constant striving against them. There's something profound about watching a river flow around obstacles. It doesn't push or fight, it simply finds its way, reshaping itself to fit whatever space it encounters. This quality of yielding without surrendering, of being gentle yet persistent, lies at the heart of one of the most beloved passages in the Tao Te Ching. Here, Lao Tzu invites us to consider what true strength might look like when we let go of our need to dominate and control. The highest good is like water, which nourishes all things and does not compete. It dwells in places that others disdain, and so it is close to the Tao. In dwelling, the good thing is the ground. In the heart, the good thing is depth. In associations, the good thing is kindness. In words, the good thing is truth. In leadership, the good thing is order. In work, the good thing is competence. In action, the good thing is timing. Since there is no competition, there is no blame. Water becomes Lao Tzu's perfect teacher here, embodying principles that seem to contradict everything our culture tells us about success and achievement. When we think about nourishment, we often imagine active giving, someone deliberately providing care or resources. But water nourishes simply by being what it is. It doesn't strategize about which plants deserve its attention or calculate the return on its investment. It flows where it's needed and sustains life effortlessly. The idea that water does not compete strikes at something fundamental about human anxiety. We spend enormous energy positioning ourselves against others, measuring our worth by comparison, fighting for limited resources or recognition. Water suggests a different approach entirely. It doesn't need to prove its value or defend its territory. It simply fulfills its nature, and in doing so, becomes indispensable. Perhaps even more challenging is the notion that water dwells in places that others disdain. Think about where water naturally goes, the low places, the valleys, the humble spaces that others overlook or avoid. There's wisdom in this gravitational pull toward what's been discarded or undervalued. Water doesn't seek the mountaintop or the spotlight. It finds the forgotten corners, the neglected spaces, and makes them fertile. This connects to something deeper about human ego and our relationship with status. We often exhaust ourselves climbing toward recognition, prestige, or positions of obvious power. Water suggests that true influence might come from the opposite direction, from willingly occupying the spaces others don't want, from serving needs that others consider beneath them. The verse then shifts into a series of observations about where this water-like quality shows up in human life. In our living spaces, it's about being grounded rather than elevated. In our emotional lives, it's about cultivating depth rather than surface charm. In relationships, it's kindness that flows naturally rather than strategic networking. In communication, it's truth that emerges from genuine understanding rather than clever manipulation. When Lao Tzu mentions leadership, he points toward order, not the rigid control we often associate with authority, but the kind of natural organization that emerges when someone creates space for others to thrive. This is leadership that serves rather than dominates, that creates conditions for growth rather than demanding compliance. The reference to timing in action touches on something water demonstrates perfectly. Water doesn't force its way through rocks. It waits, persists, and acts when conditions are right. This patience isn't passive, but deeply attuned to natural rhythms and opportunities. The closing lines bring us back to the fundamental shift in perspective this verse offers. Since there is no competition, there is no blame. When we stop fighting against the natural flow of life, when we stop trying to force outcomes through sheer will, we also stop creating the conditions for conflict and disappointment. We can't be blamed for failures that arise from competing with reality itself. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. A river moves mountains, not by force, but by flowing where the world already leans. The deepest invitation here might be to reconsider what we mean by strength and effectiveness. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice or the most forceful action, water suggests that true power comes from alignment with the natural order of things. It comes from being genuinely useful rather than merely impressive, from nourishing life rather than just advancing our own agenda. We live in a world that equates action with productivity, movement with progress. Our calendars overflow with meetings, our minds buzz with plans, and we measure our worth by how much we accomplish each day. Yet there's something unsettling about this constant doing, a sense that despite all our effort, the most important things in life seem to happen when we're not forcing them. A friendship deepens during an unplanned conversation. A creative breakthrough arrives in a moment of stillness. A child learns to walk by letting go of the furniture. These experiences hint at a different kind of power, one that emerges when we step back rather than step forward. The Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. If leaders could hold to this, the 10,000 things would transform themselves. If they still desired to act, I would restrain them with the simplicity of the nameless. The simplicity of the nameless is without desire. Without desire, there is stillness, and the world will order itself. This verse presents us with one of the most paradoxical and profound ideas in all of Taoist thought, that the ultimate force in the universe accomplishes everything by doing nothing at all. The Tao, this fundamental principle that underlies all existence, doesn't push or pull, doesn't strategize or manipulate. It simply is, and somehow, everything that needs to happen, happens. This might sound like mystical nonsense, until we start paying attention to how things actually work in the world around us. Your heart beats without your conscious effort. Seasons change without anyone scheduling them. Plants grow towards sunlight without anyone teaching them the way. Wounds heal, rivers flow, and ecosystems balance themselves through processes that require no central planning or management. The universe is constantly creating, sustaining, and organizing itself through what appears to be effortless action. Lao Tzu suggests that human leadership could learn from this natural model. When he speaks of leaders who hold to this, he's pointing toward a way of guiding others that creates space for natural development, rather than forcey, predetermined outcomes. This kind of leadership trusts in people's inherent capacity to grow and adapt when given the right conditions. Think about the best teacher you ever had. Chances are, they didn't cram information into your head through sheer force of will. Instead, they probably created an environment where your own curiosity could flourish, where your questions were welcomed, where you felt safe to make mistakes and discover things for yourself. They guided by creating conditions, by removing obstacles, by knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The same principle applies to parenting, to friendship, to any relationship where we hope to influence positive change. When we try to control outcomes too tightly, we often create resistance. When we trust the natural unfolding of growth and change, we often find that people transform in ways we never could have engineered. The verse takes an interesting turn when it acknowledges that even leaders who understand this principle might still feel the urge to act, to intervene, to fix things directly. Lao Tzu suggests restraining this impulse with the simplicity of the nameless, returning to a state of basic presence that doesn't require elaborate strategies or complex solutions. This simplicity isn't emptiness or absence of care, it's a fullness that comes from being completely present without needing to prove anything or achieve anything. It's the quality of attention we bring to a sunset or a sleeping child, complete engagement without any agenda for improvement or change. When we operate from this place of desireless presence, something remarkable happens. The world begins to organize itself around us in ways that feel almost magical. Conversations flow naturally, solutions emerge organically. People feel heard and valued without us having to work at making them feel that way. We become a stabilizing presence that allows others to find their own center. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. A sapling doesn't struggle to grow, but it's completely alive and responsive to its environment. The wind doesn't effort its way across the plains, but it's powerfully persistent in shaping the landscape. There's a kind of skillful ease here, a way of being fully engaged while holding outcomes lightly. Perhaps what Lao Tzu is pointing toward is a fundamental trust in the intelligence of life itself. When we stop trying to be the primary actors in every situation and instead become skillful participants in the larger dance of existence, we often find that our deepest intentions manifest in ways more beautiful and effective than anything we could have planned. Can we truly step back and let the world order itself? There's something mysterious about people who possess genuine wisdom. They don't announce their knowledge or demand attention. They move through the world with a quality of presence that's hard to define, but easy to recognize. You feel safer around them, more settled, as if their inner stillness creates space for your own authenticity to emerge. They seem to understand something about life that allows them to navigate complexity with remarkable simplicity. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. Because it is unfathomable, I can only describe their appearance. Watchful, like men crossing a winter stream. Alert, like men aware of danger. Courteous, like visiting guests. Yielding, like ice about to melt. Simple, like uncarved blocks. Hollow, like valleys. Mixing, like muddy water. Who can wait quietly while the mud settles? Who can remain still until the moment of action? Observers of the Tao do not seek fulfillment. Not seeking fulfillment, they are not swayed by desire for change. This verse attempts something almost impossible, describing the indescribable quality of deep wisdom. Lao Tzu admits from the start that the essence of these ancient masters can't be captured in words, so he resorts to metaphors and images that point toward their way of being in the world. The first image, watchful like men crossing a winter stream, suggests a quality of alert presence without anxiety. When you're crossing an icy stream, you pay attention to each step, each shift in the current, each sound the ice makes. You're completely present, but not paralyzed by fear. This is the kind of awareness that wise people bring to daily life, fully engaged but not stressed, careful but not worried. The metaphor of being like visiting guests points to a fundamental humility about our place in the world. A good guest doesn't rearrange the furniture or demand that the household revolve around their preferences. They appreciate what's offered, contribute what they can, and leave things better than they found them. This suggests a way of living that honors the fact that we're temporary visitors in this world, rather than its permanent owners. The image of yielding like ice about to melt is particularly beautiful. Ice at the verge of melting is still solid enough to maintain its form, but soft enough to adapt to pressure. It's strong, but not rigid, stable, but not fixed. This captures something essential about wisdom. the ability to hold your ground while remaining flexible, to have convictions while staying open to new information. Being simple like uncarved blocks suggests the wisdom of not overcomplicating things. An uncarved block of wood contains infinite potential. It could become a bowl, a sculpture, a tool, anything, but once you start carving, you eliminate possibilities. Sometimes the wisest response is to remain simple, to not impose your ideas too quickly, to let situations develop naturally. The metaphor of being hollow like valleys points to the power of emptiness we've encountered before. Valleys don't try to be impressive like mountains, but they're where water collects, where fertile soil accumulates, where life flourishes. There's a kind of wisdom that comes from being low and receptive rather than high and conspicuous. The image of muddy water introduces one of the most practical pieces of advice in the verse. When water is stirred up, the sediment creates cloudiness that makes it impossible to see clearly. The temptation is to keep stirring, to keep trying to fix the problem through more action. But if you simply wait, the mud settles naturally and the water becomes clear. This applies to so many situations in our lives. When we're emotionally stirred up, when a relationship is in turmoil, when we're facing a difficult decision, our first instinct is often to do something, anything to resolve the situation. But sometimes the wisest response is to wait, to let things settle, to give time and space for clarity to emerge naturally. The final line suggests that people who embody this wisdom aren't constantly seeking to improve their situation or themselves. They are not driven by the restless dissatisfaction that keeps most of us constantly grasping for something different. They found a way to be content with what is, while remaining open to what might be. Most of us live in a world of opposites. We label things as good or bad, beautiful or ugly, success or failure. We organize our entire understanding around these contrasting pairs, believing that to have one, we must reject the other. But what if this fundamental way of seeing creates more problems than it solves? What if the very act of dividing reality into opposing camps prevents us from understanding how things actually work? When people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Being and non-being create each other. Difficult and easy complement each other. Long and short define each other. High and low depend on each other. Voice and silence harmonize each other. Front and back follow each other. Therefore, the sage acts without acting, teaches without speaking, accepts the rise and fall of things, creates but does not possess, acts but does not rely on their own ability, succeeds but does not dwell on success. It is because they do not dwell on success that it never leaves them. This verse reveals something fundamental about how our minds work and how reality actually operates. The moment we declare something beautiful, we've automatically created a category for its opposite. The moment we decide what counts as success, we've defined failure. This isn't just an abstract philosophical point. It shapes how we experience our daily lives. Consider how this plays out in your own experience. When you're having what you consider a good day, you're already setting up the possibility of having a bad day. When you judge your appearance as attractive, you're simultaneously creating the potential for feeling unattractive. The very categories we use to evaluate our lives trap us in endless cycles of comparison and judgment. But Lao Tzu isn't suggesting we should stop making distinctions altogether. We need to recognize danger, choose nutritious food, and appreciate beauty. The problem arises when we forget that these distinctions are mental constructs rather than absolute truths. What one culture considers beautiful, another might find ordinary. What one generation values as success, another might see as meaningless. The verse then presents a series of paired opposites that exist in relationship to each other. Being and non-being don't compete. They define each other. You can't understand fullness without emptiness or sound without silence. These pairs aren't enemies, but dance partners, each one giving meaning to the other. This has profound implications for how we approach life's challenges. Instead of trying to eliminate difficulty, we might learn to see how difficulty and ease create each other. The muscle that's never challenged remains weak. The person who's never faced hardship often lacks resilience. The relationship that's never tested may lack depth. When we truly understand this interdependence, We can begin to hold our preferences more lightly. We can enjoy success without being devastated by failure. We can appreciate beauty without being disgusted by ugliness. We can work toward our goals without being destroyed when things don't go as planned. The sage described in the latter part of the verse embodies this understanding. They act without forcing, teach without lecturing, create without needing to own their creations. They've learned to work with the natural flow of opposites rather than fighting against it. Perhaps most importantly, they don't dwell on their successes. This isn't about false modesty or lack of appreciation. It's about understanding that the moment you grasp too tightly to any achievement, you begin to lose it. Success that's held lightly tends to flow naturally, while success that's hoarded creates anxiety and eventual disappointment. We spend most of our lives focused on what's there, the solid, the visible, the obvious. We admire the strength of walls, the beauty of pottery, the utility of tools, yet none of these things would be useful without the spaces they contain. A room without emptiness would be solid stone. A cup without hollowness couldn't hold water. Even our bodies depend on the hollow spaces within them, lungs, stomach, blood vessels, to sustain life. This relationship between form and emptiness shapes everything we experience. 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It is the center hole that makes it useful. Clay is formed into a vessel. It is the emptiness within that makes it useful. Doors and windows are cut for a room. It is the empty spaces that make it useful. Therefore, what is present is beneficial, but what is absent makes it functional. This verse invites us to completely flip our usual way of seeing value and importance. We're conditioned to notice what's present, what's substantial, what takes up space, but Lao Tzu draws our attention to the spaces between things, the gaps that make function possible. Consider the wheel, one of humanity's most important inventions. We might focus on the rim, the spokes, the materials and craftsmanship, but without the empty center where the axle goes, you'd have a solid disc that couldn't rotate. The nothing at the center enables the something of the wheel to do its work. This principle extends far beyond physical objects. In music, the rests between notes create rhythm and allow melodies to breathe. In conversation, the pauses between words give meaning space to land. In relationships, the time spent apart often makes time together more precious. The empty spaces aren't just necessary, they're what make everything else possible. Think about your daily schedule. If every moment were filled with activity, with noise, with stimulation, you'd quickly become overwhelmed and exhausted. The gaps in your day, the quiet moments, the transitions, the spaces where nothing particular is happening, these allow you to process experience, to rest, to simply be human. This has profound implications for how we approach personal growth and problem solving. We often think that improvement means adding more knowledge, more skills, more activities, more stuff. But sometimes the most transformative changes come from subtraction, from creating space, rather than filling it. A cluttered mind struggles to think clearly. A packed schedule leaves no room for spontaneity or deep reflection. A conversation dominated by one person's talking leaves no space for genuine exchange. The art of living well often involves knowing what to leave out, what to keep empty, what to resist filling. There's also something here about the invisible support systems that make our lives possible. The infrastructure we rarely think about, the electrical grid, the water systems, the complex networks of cooperation that bring food to our tables, these often involve vast amounts of empty space. Roads are mostly empty space between destinations. The internet is mostly empty space between nodes of information. Even our sense of self depends on this principle. What makes you uniquely you isn't just your thoughts, feelings, and experiences, but the particular way these are arranged, the spaces between them, the things you don't think or feel or do. Your personality is as much about what you leave out as what you include. Perhaps this verse is pointing toward a different kind of wealth and abundance, one that comes from appreciating emptiness, rather than always trying to fill it. Learning to be comfortable with silence, with not knowing, with the open spaces in our lives where anything might emerge. In our age of social media and constant commentary, everyone seems to have an opinion about everything. We're rewarded for having quick answers, clever responses, and strong positions on complex issues. The person who speaks confidently gets attention, while the one who admits uncertainty gets overlooked. Yet there's something unsettling about this rush to judgment, this pressure to always have something smart to say. Perhaps the people who seem to know the most are often the ones who understand the least about what really matters. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Close your mouth, block off your senses, blunt the sharpness, untangle the knots, soften the glare, settle your dust. This is called the primal unity. It cannot be grasped or pushed away, cannot be benefited or harmed, cannot be honored or brought into disgrace. Therefore, it is honored by the world. This verse immediately challenges our assumptions about knowledge and communication. We typically think that people with deep understanding should be eager to share what they know, to teach and explain and enlighten others. But Lao Tzu suggests the opposite, that genuine wisdom often expresses itself through restraint rather than expression. Therefore, it is honored by the world. This isn't about keeping secrets or hoarding knowledge. It's about recognizing that the most profound truths resist simple explanation. Someone who has experienced real love doesn't need to constantly talk about what love means. Someone who has found inner peace doesn't need to lecture others about enlightenment. The depth of their understanding shows itself in how they live, not in what they say. Meanwhile, those who speak most confidently about complex topics often do so because they haven't yet encountered the mystery at the heart of these subjects. They mistake information for wisdom, opinions for insight. The more you truly understand something, the more you realize how much you don't know, and how inadequate words are for capturing the full reality. The verse then shifts to a series of images about returning to a simpler, more receptive state of being. Close your mouth suggests learning to listen rather than always needing to respond. Block off your senses doesn't mean becoming numb, but rather taking breaks from the constant stimulation that keeps us distracted from deeper awareness. Blunt the sharpness points to softening our tendency to judge, categorize and criticize everything we encounter. Untangle the knots suggests releasing the mental and emotional complications we create through overthinking and anxiety. Soften the glare might mean becoming less harsh in our perceptions, less quick to see enemies and problems everywhere. This process leads to what Lao Tzu calls primal unity, a state of being that's integrated, undivided, whole. It's not a special achievement or mystical experience, but rather our natural condition when we're not fragmenting ourselves through constant mental activity. In this state, we're no longer trying to maintain an image, defend a position, or prove our worth. We simply are what we are. Settle your dust is perhaps the most beautiful image. Think of a glass of muddy water. When you keep stirring it, the sediment stays suspended and the water remains cloudy. But if you simply let it sit, the mud settles naturally and the water becomes clear. Our minds work similarly. The constant churning of thoughts, worries, and opinions keeps our inner vision cloudy. But when we learn to be still, clarity emerges naturally. The verse describes this unified state as beyond ordinary categories of success and failure, gain and loss, praise and blame. It doesn't mean becoming indifferent to outcomes, but rather finding a center that remains stable regardless of external circumstances. When you're not constantly trying to manipulate how others see you, you become paradoxically more honorable and trustworthy. Perhaps what this verse is really pointing toward is the difference between performing knowledge and embodying wisdom. The performer needs an audience, needs validation, needs to be seen as clever or insightful. The wise person simply lives from their understanding, letting their actions speak for themselves. They've learned that the most profound teaching happens through presence rather than words. We spend most of our lives looking outward, studying the world, analyzing others, gathering information about everything except the one thing we have the most direct access to, ourselves. We can recite facts about distant planets, explain complex social theories, and offer detailed opinions about other people's behavior. But ask us to describe our own inner landscape with the same precision, and we often find ourselves surprisingly uncertain. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay with your center and embrace death, you are truly alive. This verse presents us with two kinds of knowledge and two kinds of power. The first kind, knowing and mastering others, is what we typically associate with intelligence and strength. It's valuable and necessary for navigating social relationships and professional environments. But Lao Tzu suggests there's a deeper level of wisdom and power that comes from turning our attention inward. Knowing yourself sounds simple until you actually try to do it. Can you accurately describe your emotional patterns, your unconscious motivations, your automatic reactions to stress? Can you distinguish between your authentic desires and the wants that have been shaped by advertising, social pressure, or childhood programming? Most of us have spent so little time in genuine self-observation that we're strangers to ourselves. This self-knowledge isn't the same as self-obsession or endless psychological analysis. It's more like developing a clear, honest relationship with your own mind and emotions. It's noticing how you react to criticism, how you behave when you're tired, what triggers your anger or anxiety. It's understanding your genuine strengths and limitations, rather than the image you try to project to the world. The distinction between mastering others and mastering yourself is equally profound. Mastering others requires manipulation, coercion, or control, all of which create resistance and eventual rebellion. Even when successful, this kind of power is exhausting to maintain and ultimately unstable. Self-mastery works differently. It's not about suppressing your emotions or forcing yourself to behave perfectly. It's about developing the ability to respond rather than react, to choose your actions consciously rather than being driven by unconscious impulses. It's the difference between being pushed around by your moods and learning to work skillfully with your emotional life. Someone with genuine self-mastery doesn't need to control others because they're not at the mercy of their own internal chaos. They can remain calm in conflicts because they're not triggered by other people's anger. They can be generous because they're not driven by scarcity and fear. Their power comes from internal stability rather than external domination. The verse then shifts to a completely different understanding of wealth and vitality. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. This isn't about settling for less or lowering your standards. It's about recognizing the abundance that's already present in your life, the relationships, experiences, capabilities, and simple pleasures that you might be taking for granted while chasing after more. This realization of having enough isn't a one-time insight, but an ongoing practice. In a culture that profits from our dissatisfaction, that constantly tells us we need more to be happy, remembering that we already have enough requires regular attention. It means appreciating what's already here, rather than living in a perpetual state of wanting what's not here. The final lines introduce perhaps the most challenging idea in the verse, embracing death as a way of being truly alive. This doesn't mean being morbid or suicidal, but rather accepting the temporary nature of everything, including our own existence. When we truly accept that we're going to die, it changes how we live. Many of our daily anxieties and petty concerns lose their grip when we remember that none of this is permanent. The embarrassment, the social drama, the career setbacks that seem so important today will all be forgotten eventually. This perspective doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it precious. People who have faced their own mortality often report a profound shift in priorities. They become less concerned with impressing others and more interested in authentic connection. They worry less about accumulating possessions and more about experiencing beauty. They spend less time on activities that don't matter and more time on what brings genuine fulfillment. Staying with your center while embracing death means finding a place of stability within yourself that doesn't depend on external circumstances. It's not a belief, it's the quiet, stable center you return to when everything else falls away. This isn't a philosophical position, but a lived experience of something in you that feels eternal even as everything else passes away. There's something seductive about the idea of mastery, of bringing the world under our control. We develop technologies to manage nature, systems to organize society, strategies to achieve our goals. The more sophisticated we become, the more we believe we can engineer outcomes, fix problems, and perfect everything around us. But what if this fundamental approach, this need to grasp and control, actually works against our deepest intentions? Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. You cannot improve it. If you try to change it, you will ruin it. If you try to hold it, you will lose it. So sometimes things are ahead, and sometimes they are behind. Sometimes breathing is hard, sometimes it comes easily. Sometimes there is strength, and sometimes weakness. Sometimes we are up, and sometimes down. Therefore the sage avoids extremes, avoids extravagance, avoids arrogance. This verse confronts one of our most cherished beliefs, that we can and should improve the world through our efforts. Lao Tzu's response is not cynicism, but a deeper recognition of the world's inherent wholeness and intelligence. When he says the world is sacred, he's pointing to something that exists in perfect balance, something that contains its own wisdom and doesn't need our management. This doesn't mean we should ignore suffering or avoid taking positive action. The gardener who understands soil, seasons, and plant biology will be more successful than one who simply forces plants to grow according to their personal timeline. The statement, "If you try to change it, you will ruin it," speaks to the unintended consequences that often result from well-intentioned interventions. The more you try to change someone you love, the more likely you are to damage the connection between you. The verse then offers a series of observations about the natural rhythm of existence. Things move ahead and fall behind. Breathing is sometimes easy, sometimes difficult. We experience strength and weakness, highs and lows. This isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental characteristic of how life works. Our culture often treats these natural fluctuations as failures to be corrected. We try to maintain constant growth, perpetual happiness, unending progress. We medicate normal sadness, stimulate ourselves out of natural low periods, and exhaust ourselves trying to stay permanently up. But what if these cycles are exactly how things are supposed to work? Consider your own energy throughout the day, the week, the year. There are times when you're naturally more creative, more social, more productive. There are other times when you need to rest, reflect, or simply be quiet. Fighting against these rhythms creates internal conflict and usually makes us less effective, not more. The sage described in the final lines has learned to work with these natural patterns rather than fighting them. They avoid extremes, not because moderation is morally superior, but because extremes are inherently unstable and create their own problems. Someone who works intensely all the time will eventually burn out. Someone who's always relaxed may never accomplish anything meaningful. Avoiding extravagance means not trying to do too much, have too much, or be too much. It's recognizing that enough is enough, but more isn't always better. That sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the simplest one. Avoiding arrogance means maintaining humility about our ability to understand and control complex systems. It means recognizing that we're part of something much larger and more intelligent than our individual minds can comprehend. This humility doesn't make us passive, but actually makes us more effective, because we're working with reality rather than against it. Perhaps what this verse is really suggesting is a different relationship with change itself. Instead of trying to be the primary agents of change, we might learn to be skillful participants in changes that are already happening. Instead of grasping for control, we might develop the wisdom to know when to act and when to step back, when to push and when to yield. There's something paradoxical about all truly great achievements. The most powerful leaders often govern with the lightest touch. The most profound teachers rarely lecture. The most influential people seldom try to influence anyone. They seem to accomplish extraordinary things through a kind of natural alignment, creating change that feels organic rather than forced. This points to a different understanding of what it means to be effective in the world, one that works with natural forces rather than against them. Truthful words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not truthful. The good are not argumentative. The argumentative are not good. The knowledgeable are not broadly learned. The broadly learned are not knowledgeable. The sage does not accumulate. The more they help others, the richer they become. The more they give to others, the more they possess. The way of heaven is to benefit others without harming. The way of the sage is to work without competing. This final verse of the Tao Te Ching offers a series of observations that turn conventional wisdom on its head. Each line challenges our usual assumptions about truth, goodness, knowledge, and success. These aren't meant to be absolute rules, but rather invitations to look more deeply at what we value and why. The opening lines distinguish between different kinds of beauty and truth. The truth that emerges from genuine experience often sounds simple, even plain. It doesn't need elaborate decoration or clever phrasing to be powerful. Think of the most meaningful things people have said to you during difficult times. They were probably not eloquent speeches, but simple, heartfelt words that came from a place of authentic care. Meanwhile, language that's designed primarily to impress or persuade often sacrifices accuracy for effect. Political rhetoric, advertising copy, and social media posts optimized for engagement may be beautifully crafted, but they're often more concerned with creating an impression than conveying truth. The contrast between good people and argumentative people points to something important about how wisdom expresses itself. Those who have found genuine peace and understanding rarely feel the need to prove they're right. They're more interested in understanding than in winning debates. They recognize that trying to force others to accept their views usually creates resistance rather than genuine change. The distinction between knowledge and broad learning suggests that depth matters more than breadth. Someone might know a little about many subjects, but lack the deep understanding that comes from sustained engagement with what truly matters. Real knowledge involves not just collecting information, but developing wisdom about how to live well. The verse then shifts to describing the sage, the idealized person who embodies Taoist principles. This person does not accumulate, meaning they're not constantly trying to acquire more possessions, achievements, or status symbols. Instead, they've discovered a different kind of wealth that comes from giving rather than getting. This isn't just moral idealism, but a practical observation about how influence actually works. The people who try to hoard power, attention, or resources often find themselves isolated and defensive. But those who freely share what they have, time, attention, skills, wisdom, often find that life supports them in unexpected ways. They create networks of genuine relationship rather than transactional exchanges. The image of becoming richer by helping others and possessing more by giving away points to resources that multiply when shared rather than diminish. Love, attention, knowledge, and care all work this way. When you truly listen to someone, you don't have less capacity to listen to others. You actually become a better listener. When you share what you know, you don't become less knowledgeable. You often deepen your own understanding. The final lines offer a summary of the entire Taoist approach to life. The way of heaven, the natural order of things, benefits everything without needing to harm anything. The sun doesn't begrudge its light to anyone. The earth doesn't charge rent for the space it provides. Natural systems create abundance through cooperation rather than competition. The sage learns to work in harmony with this natural way. They accomplish their goals without needing to defeat others. They create value without needing to diminish anyone else. They find their place in the larger pattern of existence rather than trying to dominate or control it. This is perhaps the deepest teaching of the Tao Te Ching, that we can be most effective when we simply exist in harmony. We've journeyed through these verses, reflecting on ancient wisdom. This timeless text offers a profound guiding invitation to align ourselves with the natural flow of life. It asks us to trust the quiet wisdom of stillness, the understated power of yielding, and the deep richness found in simplicity. The Tao's teachings are a gentle, persistent reminder that true strength often lies in letting go, that real abundance comes from appreciating what we already have, and that genuine impact emerges not from forcing, but from simply being. May these reflections offer you moments of quiet insight and a deeper connection to the effortless way of existence. We invite you to carry these echoes of ancient wisdom into your own days, finding the Tao in the everyday and the profound in the simple. We don't need to grasp the Tao, only to sit beside it and listen.